A chill wind rattled the windows of Blackwood Manor, a Gothic behemoth that cast a long shadow over the cliffside. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of old leather, aged whiskey, and the unmistakable aroma of impending death. Ethan Blackwood, a man more accustomed to the boardrooms of Manhattan than the dim-lit halls of his childhood home, stood beside the massive four-poster bed. His father, Alistair Blackwood, lay propped against a mountain of pillows, his once sharp eyes now clouded with the fog of illness. "Ethan," Alistair's voice rasped, a mere echo of the commanding tone that had once ruled the Blackwood Empire. "You've come." "Of course, father," Ethan replied, his voice a study in practiced composure. Yet, beneath the polished facade, a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. The summons had been unexpected, the tone ominous. Alistair was a man of few words and even fewer wasted breaths. Alistair motioned for Ethan to approach, his bony hand trembling as he extended it towards a worn leather-bound journal resting on the bedside table. "This is for you." Ethan took the journal, its weight surprisingly heavy in his hands. He opened it to the first page, his eyes scanning the elegant script. "What is it, father?" Alistair's lips curled into a wry smile, a flicker of his old cunning returning to his eyes. "My final wish." Ethan frowned, his brow furrowed with confusion. "A wish?" "Yes," Alistair wheezed, his breaths growing shallower. "I wish for you to marry." Ethan's head snapped up, disbelief etched onto his features. "Marry? Father, "Within a week," Alistair interrupted, his voice a mere whisper now. "Her name is Isabella." "Isabella," Ethan repeated, the name unfamiliar and yet strangely haunting. "Find her, marry her." Alistair's voice trailed off, his eyes fluttering closed. "Father?" Ethan leaned forward, his hand reaching out to his father's frail shoulder, but Alistair was gone, his final breath escaping his lips like a sigh. The following day, a lavish service was held, a somber affair attended by hundreds of mourners in designer suits and dark sunglasses. Ethan stood at the graveside, the weight of the man's influence and the unanswered questions of his empire's future pressing heavily upon his shoulders. As the last of the limousines departed, a few close family members and trusted advisors lingered, sharing quiet condolences before slowly dispersing. Ethan remained alone with his thoughts and the biting wind that whipped through the manicured graveyard. Returning to the silence of the empty house, Ethan sank into his father's favorite armchair, the leather creaking beneath him. He clutched the journal, its weight a tangible reminder of the mystery his father had left behind. His mind raced, questions swirling like the storm that raged outside. Who was Isabella? What was his father's motive? And why this strange, urgent request on his deathbed? As he stared out at the turbulent sea crashing against the cliffs below, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. His life was about to change forever. The dimly lit jazz bar, a hidden gem nestled in a cobblestone alley of Manhattan, provided the perfect backdrop for their first encounter. As Ethan entered, his eyes were immediately drawn to a figure seated alone at a secluded corner table. Isabella. She was a vision in a simple black dress, her silhouette illuminated by the soft glow of candlelight. Her dark hair cascaded down her shoulders in loose waves, framing a face that could launch 1,000 ships. High cheekbones, a sculpted jawline, and eyes that shimmered like polished obsidian. Ethan approached, his heart quickening with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. He extended a hand as he introduced himself. "Isabella?" She rose, her smile warm and inviting. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her voice a melodious blend of honey and smoke. "Thank you for coming." They settled into their seats, a comfortable silence settling between them. Ethan observed her as she sipped her martini, noting the elegant curve of her neck, the delicate way she held her glass. She exuded an air of sophistication, a subtle hint of vulnerability peeking through her composed exterior. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, dancing from art and literature to travel and philanthropy. Ethan found himself captivated by her quick wit, her intelligent observations, and the hint of sadness that occasionally clouded her eyes. He couldn't help but wonder about the hidden depths behind her enigmatic facade. As the night progressed, Ethan noticed the way their eyes would lock across the table, the subtle shift in their body language that spoke of a growing connection. He sensed an unspoken understanding between them, a shared spark that ignited with every glance, every touch. When it was time to leave, Ethan found himself reluctant to part ways. He reached out and took her hand, feeling a jolt of electricity at their touch. "Isabella," he began, his voice husky with emotion. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and longing. "Yes." Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. "Would you like to have dinner with me again?" A slow smile spread across her face, her eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "I'd love to, Ethan." As they walked out of the bar, the city lights twinkled above them like 1,000 stars. Ethan knew in his heart that this was just the beginning. Their whirlwind romance was about to unfold, a symphony of secrets, desires, and a love that would defy all odds. The wedding was a masterpiece of extravagance, a symphony of crystal chandeliers, cascading orchids, and the hushed whispers of high society. Isabella, radiant in a custom-designed gown that shimmered like moonlight on water, glided down the aisle towards Ethan, who stood tall and proud, a mask of composure barely concealing his racing heart. As they exchanged vows, their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment the world melted away. The ornate cathedral, the sea of faces, the paparazzi flashes, none of it mattered. It was just them, two souls drawn together by an inexplicable force, promising forever in the face of the unknown. The reception that followed was a blur of champagne toasts, choreographed dances, and forced smiles for the cameras. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of festivities, Ethan found solace in Isabella's presence. Her laughter was like music to his ears, her touch a soothing balm to his soul. Their honeymoon was a whirlwind tour of exotic destinations, sun-drenched beaches in the Maldives, bustling markets in Marrakech, moonlit gondola rides in Venice. Each new experience brought them closer, their shared laughter echoing through ancient ruins and opulent hotel suites. One evening, as they strolled along a moonlit beach, Ethan turned to Isabella, his heart heavy with unspoken emotions. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. Isabella smiled, her eyes reflecting the shimmering moonlight. "Like me?" "Someone who challenges me, who makes me question everything I thought I knew about love," Ethan replied, his gaze locked on hers. She reached out, her fingertips tracing the lines of his face. "Ethan," she began, her voice filled with a mixture of tenderness and longing. Before she could finish, Ethan leaned in and kissed her, their lips meeting in a passionate embrace that spoke volumes. In that moment, all doubts vanished, replaced by the intoxicating certainty that he was falling for her, deeply and irrevocably. As the days turned into nights, their connection deepened. They shared intimate secrets, whispered dreams, and made love under starlit skies. Ethan found himself torn between the undeniable allure of their connection and the nagging doubt that perhaps it was all too good to be true. Was Isabella the woman she appeared to be, or was their whirlwind romance just a carefully constructed illusion? Despite his reservations, Ethan couldn't deny the undeniable truth. He was falling in love with Isabella. Whether their love was real or a product of his father's schemes, he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. However, the future held a different path for them. The whispers started as a subtle undercurrent, barely audible beneath the harmonious symphony of their newfound bliss. At first, Ethan dismissed them as idle gossip, the jealous mutterings of those envious of their whirlwind romance. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, casting a dark shadow over their idyllic life. One evening, at a charity gala hosted by the Blackwood Foundation, Ethan overheard a snippet of conversation that chilled him to the bone. "Did you hear about Isabella?" a socialite hissed to her companion. "Apparently she has a rather colorful past." Ethan's grip tightened around his champagne flute, the crystal threatening to shatter under the pressure. He excused himself from the conversation and retreated to a secluded balcony overlooking the glittering cityscape. The whispers had followed him here, their insidious tendrils wrapping around his heart, squeezing the joy out of his newfound love. Later that night, as Isabella slept peacefully beside him, Ethan lay awake, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Who was the woman he had married? What secrets did she harbor beneath her flawless facade? Driven by an escalating unease, Ethan delved into Isabella's past and ultimately enlisted the services of Marcus Dalton, a trusted family investigator, for a personal matter. Ethan's decision to hire Marcus was born out of necessity, grounded in the trust he and his father had placed in the seasoned investigator. Marcus brought light to his struggles, providing crucial evidence that began to unravel the mysteries surrounding Isabella's enigmatic past. The ornate silver frame quivered in Ethan's hand, the photograph a stark accusation against the woman who now lay sleeping soundly in their shared bed. It was a picture taken years ago, Isabella posing provocatively in a revealing gown, her eyes alight with a sultry confidence that chilled Ethan to the bone. A high-end escort. The words, whispered by his personal investigator, echoed in his mind, a damning indictment of the woman he'd given his heart to. Ethan's meticulously constructed world crumbled around him. The grand facade of their love, built on stolen moments and whispered promises, now appeared as hollow as the whispers themselves. The anger simmered in his veins, a bitter cocktail of betrayal and hurt. He waited until dawn, the first rays of sunlight piercing the darkness of their bedroom, before he woke her. Isabella stirred, her eyes blinking open, sleepily searching for his gaze. "Ethan," she murmured, a soft smile gracing her lips. But her smile faltered as she met his eyes, the warmth replaced by a flicker of unease. "What's wrong?" Ethan held up the photograph, his voice a harsh rasp. "This is you, isn't it?" Isabella's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She sat up, her voice barely a whisper. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" Ethan retorted, his anger rising. "Is it true? Are you an escort?" Isabella's silence was a deafening confirmation. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held his gaze, her chin lifted in defiance. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" Ethan scoffed, his voice laced with venom. "How complicated can it be? You lied to me. You deceived me." "I never lied," Isabella protested, her voice thick with emotion. "I never claimed to be someone I'm not." "But you weren't honest with me," Ethan countered, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "You let me believe—" He couldn't finish the sentence, the words choking him. Isabella reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. "Ethan, please let me explain." He pulled away, his heart aching with the betrayal. "Explain what?" "How you manipulated your way into my life. How you played me for a fool." Isabella flinched as if he had struck her. "I never manipulated you," she whispered, her voice raw with pain. "I fell in love with you." "Love?" Ethan spat out the word, its taste bitter on his tongue. "How can you speak of love when you built our relationship on a lie?" Tears streamed down Isabella's face, her composure finally crumbling. "I know I made a mistake," she sobbed. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning. But I was afraid of losing you." Ethan stared at her, his heart torn between love and betrayal. The woman he had fallen for was a stranger, a phantom of his own desires, yet in her tear-filled eyes he saw a glimmer of the truth, a truth he desperately wanted to believe. He turned away, unable to bear the sight of her pain any longer. "I need time," he choked out, his voice barely audible. "Time to think." As he left the room, the weight of the betrayal settled upon him like a suffocating shroud. He felt lost, adrift in a sea of doubts and shattered dreams. The following day, the library, usually a sanctuary of knowledge and quiet contemplation, felt oppressive under the weight of Ethan's fury. He stormed in, the ornate doors slamming shut behind him with a resounding echo. Isabella sat ensconced in a leather armchair, a forgotten book resting in her lap, her eyes reflecting a mixture of apprehension and defiance. "Talk," Ethan commanded, his voice a chilling rasp that cut through the silence like a knife. Isabella straightened, her chin lifting as she met his gaze. "Your father," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "He's the reason I became an escort." The words hung heavy in the air, a venomous confession that poisoned the room. Ethan's blood ran cold, a knot of rage twisting in his gut. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. Isabella took a deep breath, steeling herself against the torrent of emotions swirling within her. "We met at a charity event," she explained, her words measured and precise. "He approached me, offered me a job. I was struggling, desperate." Her voice wavered, the facade of composure momentarily cracking. "My parents had died. We'd lost everything. Your father promised me a way out, a chance to start over." Ethan's grip tightened on the back of a nearby chair, his knuckles turning white. "A job? Doing what?" Isabella's eyes filled with a haunted sorrow. "He introduced me to wealthy men, powerful men. He said it was a chance to make connections, to build a new life. But it wasn't long before I realized what he truly wanted." Her voice grew stronger, fueled by a bitter resolve. "He wanted me to become an escort. He paid me handsomely, of course, but it wasn't just about the money for him." Confusion clouded Ethan's face. "What else was it then?" "Information," Isabella spat the word out like a curse. "He wanted me to gather information, to listen, to observe, to report back to him. He used me to spy on his rivals, his enemies, anyone who posed a threat to his empire." A cold dread settled in Ethan's stomach. His father, the man he had revered, had orchestrated Isabella's descent into a life she clearly despised. Disgust and betrayal warred within him, a toxic cocktail of emotions that threatened to consume him. "Why?" he choked out, the word barely audible. "Why would he do this to me? Why would he want me to marry you?" Isabella shook her head, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I don't know. He never told me." "But you agreed to marry me," Ethan pressed, his voice raw with pain. "Was that part of his plan too?" A flicker of anguish crossed Isabella's face. "Yes. He promised me a way out, a chance to leave that life behind. He said if I married you, he would cut all ties, give me the money I needed to start over. But there was a condition." Ethan held his breath, dreading the words he knew were coming. "He wanted me to divorce you eventually, to break your heart." The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. His father had not only manipulated Isabella, but had also intended to use her as a weapon against his own son. The depth of his betrayal was staggering. Isabella reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. "I never intended to hurt you, Ethan. I fell in love with you." Ethan stared at her, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. He wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that their love was real, but the seeds of doubt had been sown. His father's twisted scheme had poisoned everything, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. As he turned to leave, a single question burned in his mind. What other secrets did his father harbor? What other lies had he woven into the fabric of their lives? The truth, he knew, was far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. Ethan paced his study, the rich mahogany floor creaking under his restless strides. Isabella's confession echoed in his mind, a haunting melody of betrayal and deceit. He wanted to believe her, to trust the sincerity in her eyes, but a gnawing doubt persisted. How could he be certain she wasn't weaving another layer of lies, now that his father was no longer alive to refute her claims? Sleep evaded him, the darkness amplifying his anxieties. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over a familiar contact. With a heavy sigh, he pressed call, the dial tone a rhythmic pulse in the silent room. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," a smooth voice answered. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Marcus," Ethan replied, his voice devoid of pleasantries. "I need your help." Marcus Dalton, a seasoned private investigator with a reputation for discretion and efficiency, had been a trusted ally of the Blackwood family for years. Ethan had always been reluctant to involve him in personal matters, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He relayed Isabella's confession to Marcus, his voice tinged with bitterness and disbelief. "I need you to find out everything you can about her. I need to know if she's telling the truth."
Marcus accepted the assignment without hesitation, his professional curiosity piqued by the intrigue surrounding the Blackwood heir's enigmatic wife. Days turned into sleepless nights as Ethan awaited Marcus's findings, each tick of the clock a painful reminder of the uncertainty that plagued him.
Finally the call came. Marcus's voice, usually calm and collected, held a note of surprise. "Mr. Blackwood, I've uncovered some interesting information." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "Tell me." Marcus proceeded to recount Isabella's tragic backstory, corroborating every detail she had shared. Her family's financial ruin, their subsequent deaths, her descent into the murky world of escorting. It was all true. The investigator even uncovered evidence of Alistair's involvement, his manipulation of Isabella's life, a chilling testament to his ruthlessness. Ethan listened in stunned silence, a wave of shame washing over him for doubting Isabella. She had been telling the truth all along, a victim of his father's machinations. "But there's one thing I haven't been able to figure out," Marcus continued, his voice laced with curiosity. "Alistair's motive for arranging the marriage. Why would he want his son to marry a woman he had forced into such a degrading profession?" Ethan's heart sank. The question echoed his own unspoken doubts. What was his father's endgame? As he hung up the phone, Ethan realized that while he had uncovered one truth, another mystery remained unsolved. The question of his father's motive lingered in the air, a spectre haunting the edges of his newfound understanding. The path to redemption was paved with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. He was determined to unravel the tangled web his father had woven, no matter the cost. The silence in the library hung heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Ethan stood before Isabella, his heart heavy with a mixture of sorrow and anger. "I spoke with Marcus," he began, his voice raspy with exhaustion. "He confirmed your story. Everything you told me, it was true." Isabella looked up, her eyes widening with a flicker of hope. "Ethan." He raised a hand, silencing her unspoken plea. "Don't," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not sure I can forgive you yet. The betrayal, it's still too raw." Isabella's shoulders slumped, the hope draining from her eyes. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan took a step closer, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "But I believe you," he continued, his voice a low rumble. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly over hers before he gently clasped it. "You can stay here for now," he offered, his voice heavy with resignation. "But I need time. Time to process everything." Isabella nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan released her hand, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. "We need to find out why he did this," he said, his voice hardening with determination. "Why he orchestrated this entire charade." Isabella's gaze met his, a spark of resolve igniting in her eyes. "We will," she agreed, "together." Ethan, without responding, retreated to his study, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Why had his father gone to such lengths to manipulate them both? What was his ultimate goal? The puzzle pieces were there, scattered and fragmented, waiting to be assembled into a coherent picture. Ethan and Isabella, united by a fragile truce and a shared thirst for answers, delved deeper into Alistair's hidden life. They sifted through stacks of documents, financial records, and personal correspondence, each piece a puzzle piece in a twisted game of deception. Late one night, as they huddled together in the dimly lit study, a breakthrough emerged from the shadows. Isabella, her fingers trembling with anticipation, held up a yellowed envelope, a wax seal bearing the Blackwood family crest. "This was among your father's personal belongings," she explained, her voice a hushed whisper. "I found it tucked away in a hidden drawer." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he carefully opened the envelope. Inside, they found a single document, a contract signed by Alistair Blackwood and Isabella's father, dated years ago. As they read the contract, a wave of disgust washed over them. It was a meticulously crafted scheme, a legal labyrinth designed to strip Isabella's father of his business and assets, leaving him financially ruined. Alistair had orchestrated it all, his greed and thirst for power fueling his ruthless actions. "I can't believe this," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with grief and disbelief. "He destroyed your family." "But it doesn't explain why he wanted us to get married," Isabella stated, her composure surprisingly unwavering, as if she had always suspected Alistair was capable of such manipulation. "Maybe we should seek help here. Marcus could have answers," Ethan offered. Days later, Marcus Dalton arrived at Blackwood Manor, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a somber expression. Ethan and Isabella greeted him in the library, the tension in the room palpable. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus began, his voice heavy with remorse, "I have a confession to make." Ethan and Isabella exchanged a worried glance. Marcus had always been a trusted ally, a man of unwavering integrity. His confession could only mean one thing: he had played a part in their predicament. "It was I who discovered Isabella's true identity," Marcus admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I was hired by your father to investigate her past, and it was my findings that led him to realize she was the daughter of his former business partner." A wave of shock washed over Ethan and Isabella. They knew Alistair's involvement in their marriage, but the revelation of Marcus's role in the scheme added a new layer of betrayal. "Why didn't you tell us?" Ethan demanded, his voice tinged with anger. Marcus sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I was sworn to secrecy by your father. He threatened to ruin my career, my reputation, if I breathed a word of it to anyone. I was afraid." Isabella's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding replacing the anger in her gaze. "We all make mistakes," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "It's what we do with those mistakes that defines us." Ethan nodded, his anger subsiding. He knew that Marcus, like Isabella, had been a pawn in Alistair's twisted game. "But why did Alistair want us to marry?" Ethan pressed, his mind still grappling with the unanswered question. What was his endgame? Marcus shook his head, a troubled expression clouding his face. "I don't know," he admitted. "I can only speculate. Perhaps he felt guilty, but I suspect his motives were far more complex than that." He paused, his gaze shifting between Ethan and Isabella. "I believe that my discovery of Isabella's true identity was a turning point. It was then that Alistair came up with the idea of the marriage. But his exact reasoning, that remains a mystery." A heavy silence descended upon the room, the unanswered question hanging in the air like a ghost. Ethan and Isabella knew that their journey was far from over. They had exposed one layer of Alistair's deceit, but the truth behind his ultimate motive remained elusive. However, one thing was clear: they were no longer alone in their fight. Marcus, humbled by his confession and eager to redeem himself, pledged his unwavering support. Together, they would continue their quest for answers, determined to uncover the truth and dismantle the empire Alistair had built on a foundation of lies. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Isabella found herself drawn back to the place she had once called home. The grand mansion where she had spent her childhood was a distant memory, a symbol of a life stolen by Alistair Blackwood's treachery. Now she stood before a modest bungalow, the last vestige of her family's former wealth. The house held a bittersweet charm, its worn facade a testament to the trials and tribulations her family had endured. Isabella's heart ached with a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow as she turned the key in the rusty lock and stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows, illuminating the faded wallpaper and worn furniture. Isabella wandered through the rooms, each step a journey down memory lane. Her parents' laughter echoed in her ears, the scent of her mother's perfume lingering in the air. As she reached her father's study, a wave of determination washed over her. This was where he had spent countless hours poring over financial documents, strategizing, and fighting for his business. Perhaps in his meticulousness, he had left behind a clue, a hidden message that could help them expose Alistair's crimes. Isabella began her search, her fingers tracing the spines of books, sifting through drawers, and peering behind paintings. Hours turned into minutes, and her hope began to dwindle. Just as she was about to give up, her hand brushed against a loose floorboard beneath the desk. With a surge of adrenaline, she pried up the board, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled among a few family heirlooms, was a worn, leather-bound journal. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest as she opened it, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. It was her father's journal, a detailed account of his business dealings with Alistair Blackwood. As she read through the pages, a chilling truth emerged. Alistair had not only betrayed her father, he had systematically defrauded him, siphoning off millions of dollars from their joint ventures. The journal contained detailed records of the transactions, irrefutable evidence of Alistair's crimes. Isabella had stumbled upon the very documents that could bring down his empire, the key to exposing his deceit and reclaiming her family's legacy. With trembling hands, she clutched the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face. It was a bittersweet victory, a vindication of her father's memory, and a testament to his unwavering integrity. Isabella returned to Blackwood Manor, the journal a precious cargo that held the power to reshape their destinies. Ethan, seeing the glimmer of triumph in her eyes, knew that she might have unearthed a crucial piece of the puzzle. With the truth laid bare before them, Ethan and Isabella stood on the precipice of a new beginning, yet the revelation of Alistair's machinations had left them reeling. Ethan, wrestling with conflicting emotions, longed to stay with Isabella. He was drawn to her strength, her resilience, and the undeniable connection they shared. But the revelation of her past, as an escort, a life forced upon her by his own father, left a bitter taste in his mouth. Guilt gnawed at him, a tangled mess of emotions warring within. Isabella, ever perceptive, sensed his turmoil. Her love for him burned bright, but it was tempered by a deep-seated hurt. She longed for his understanding, for a future together built on trust and honesty. He sought out Isabella, his voice thick with remorse. "I owe you an apology," he confessed, his eyes filled with pain. "I misjudged you, accused you. I had no idea the depths to which my father would sink." Isabella was taken aback by Ethan's sincerity and humility. A glimmer of hope ignited within her as she realized that he was nothing like his father. Her love for him deepened, seeing the genuine remorse and empathy in his eyes. "I understand your confusion," she replied softly, her voice laced with newfound optimism. "But your father's actions don't define you, Ethan." "I don't know what to do now," Ethan admitted, his voice laced with despair. "Everything I thought I knew about my family, my inheritance, it's all a lie." Isabella's eyes sparkled with determination. "You should start with the company," she suggested. "I wouldn't want anyone else to go through what I did. There might be other people who are suffering because of your father's schemes. It's time to make things right for them." Ethan nodded, a flicker of hope rekindling in his eyes. Isabella's words resonated with him, offering a clear path forward. With renewed purpose, he turned his attention to the Blackwood Empire. He meticulously reviewed the company's operations, uncovering the extent of his father's corruption. He dismissed the complicit board members, replacing them with individuals of integrity and vision. He implemented a new code of ethics, emphasizing transparency, fair business practices, and social responsibility. In the midst of this transformation, Ethan realized that Isabella deserved far more than an apology. She had been robbed of her rightful inheritance, her father's legacy stolen by Alistair's greed. With a newfound clarity, he approached her with a proposal. "Isabella," he began, his voice filled with sincerity, "I want you to become my partner in the company. Together, we can rebuild Blackwood into something we can both be proud of." Isabella's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with gratitude. "I accept," she replied, her voice filled with hope. "Together, we will create a future that honors both our families." As the months passed, the wounds of betrayal began to heal. The shared trauma they had endured had brought them closer, their love a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. One evening, as they sat on the terrace overlooking the sprawling grounds of Blackwood Manor, Ethan turned to Isabella, his eyes filled with a warmth that had been absent for so long. Ethan asked with curiosity, Honey, why do you think my father wanted us to marry? I think it's clear. I'm grateful he did because I found you through him, and I've never loved a man in my entire life, except for you, Ethan, she admitted. I love you too, darling. I realize now that I was mistaken to doubt you, he confessed sincerely, his voice soft. You've been the only person in my life who has always been honest with me. Isabella smiled, her heart swelling with love. We all make mistakes, she replied, echoing her words from their earlier conversation with Marcus. The important thing is to learn from them. Ethan reached out, his fingers intertwining with hers. We've been through so much, he said, his voice thick with emotion, but I believe that together we can overcome anything. Isabella nodded, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. Together, she echoed, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. In the years that followed, Ethan and Isabella built a life together, a testament to the enduring power of love and forgiveness. They traveled the world, supporting charitable causes and using their wealth and influence to make a positive impact on the lives of others. The Blackwood Empire flourished under their leadership, a symbol of their shared values and unwavering commitment to ethical business practices. Their love story, forged in the crucible of adversity, became a legend whispered in the halls of power, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and love could prevail. The end. What twisted motive did Ethan's father have for orchestrating this marriage? Is there more to this story than meets the eye? Subscribe now for more stories. If you're hooked on this suspenseful tale, be sure to share it with your friends who love a good mystery. Have a nice day.